The rain was falling in a soft, relentless drizzle as I stood in the small churchyard of St. Mary's in Ashland, Oregon. It felt like the sky itself was grieving my husband, William. At 62, I was a widow after 40 years of marriage, surrounded by familiar faces, neighbors, old colleagues, our children, but I'd never felt so alone. The weight of those final months pressed against my chest, heavier than the damp air. William's death from a heart attack had been sudden, but the distance between us had been growing for months. A slow, painful unraveling I still couldn't make sense of. Father Michael, who'd married us in 1983 and baptized our children, Emily and Thomas, stepped toward me as the last mourners began to drift away. His face, lined with years of kindness, held something unreadable. "Susan," he said softly, his hand grazing my shoulder, "William asked me to give you this." He pulled a sealed envelope from his coat pocket, his voice barely rising above the patter of rain on the awning above us. "He gave it to me 3 months ago and made me promise to wait until after the service." 3 months ago. My breath caught. That was when everything started to change, when William began pulling away. His warmth replaced by a coldness I didn't recognize. The man who'd once kissed my forehead every morning had become a stranger, snapping at small things, hiding behind his phone, coming home late with excuses that didn't add up. I'd spent those months wondering what I'd done wrong, why the man I'd loved for 4 decades seemed to stop loving me back. The envelope trembled in my hands. My name, Susan, was written across it in William's steady, familiar handwriting. But the letters looked careful, almost strained, like he'd poured his soul into each stroke. My daughter, Emily, appeared beside me, her face pale under her black scarf. "Mom, let's get you home. You're soaked." Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the worry in it. Our son Thomas joined us, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes red from holding back tears. "What's in it, Mom?" he asked, nodding at the envelope. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely steady. The truth was, I was terrified to find out. Those last months with William had been a fog of confusion and hurt. Mysterious late nights at his carpentry workshop, sharp words that cut deeper than they should have. A distance in his eyes that made me question everything I thought I knew about us. Had he been planning to leave me? Was there someone else? Or had he simply fallen out of love? The envelope felt like a bomb, and I wasn't sure I was ready to open it. Standing there in the rain, clutching that envelope, I couldn't help but think back to the life William and I had built together. For 40 years, we were the couple everyone in Ashland envied. We met in 1982 at the town's annual summer fair, where I was helping at the school's bake sale booth, my hands dusted with flour from rolling out pie dough. William, a lanky carpenter with a crooked smile, stopped by to buy a slice of my peach pie. He took one bite, grinned, and said, "If you can make pie like this, I'm gonna have to marry you." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the spatula. 2 years later, he proposed under the oak tree at Lithia Park, down on one knee with a ring he'd carved himself from walnut wood. I said yes before he even finished asking. Our life settled into a rhythm that felt like a warm, familiar song. Every morning at 6 a.m., I'd wake to the sound of William humming in the shower, his off-key rendition of some old folk tune filling our little house on Pine Street. By the time I shuffled to the kitchen in my slippers, he'd be sitting at the table, lacing up his work boots. "Morning, sweetheart," he'd say, planting a kiss on my forehead before I'd even rubbed the sleep from my eyes. I'd pack his lunch, a ham sandwich with extra mustard, a crisp apple, and a couple of oatmeal cookies from the bakery on Main Street. He'd pretend to grumble about the cookies, saying they'd ruin his figure, but he'd always eat them first, leaving crumbs on his shirt as he headed out to his carpentry workshop. William's pride and joy was our home. He'd built half of it himself, the wrap-around porch, the cedar bookshelves in our living room, the swing out front where we'd sit on summer evenings, watching fireflies dance in the yard. "Look at that swing, Susan," he'd say, a beer in his hand and a grin on his face. Sturdy enough to hold us for another 40 years. I'd bring him a glass of iced tea, sweetened just the way he liked, and we'd sit there, our shoulders touching, waving at neighbors as they passed by with their dogs or kids on bikes. Those moments were my treasure, the quiet heartbeat of our life together. Sunday suppers at William's mother, Evelyn's house, were sacred. I'd spend Saturday afternoons making his favorite dish, chicken pot pie, the recipe Evelyn taught me when we got engaged. "The trick," she'd whisper, leaning close like it was a state secret, is a splash of cream in the filling. Don't skim. At those dinners, William would brag about me to anyone who'd listen. Susan's got the third graders reading Shakespeare, he'd say, his eyes crinkling with pride. Raised $5,000 for the library fundraiser, too. He made me feel like I could do anything, like I was the most remarkable woman he'd ever known, even when I was just being myself. That our children were our greatest joy. Emily, our daughter, became a doctor in Portland, always calling to check on us with her warm, steady voice. Thomas, our son, was a journalist in Seattle, chasing stories with the same stubborn streak he got from his dad. William would light up when people asked about them. Emily's got her mom's heart and my bad sense of direction, he'd joke. And Thomas, he's gonna write the next great American novel one day. We'd started dreaming about retirement, about that trip to Italy's Amalfi Coast we'd been saving for. William even downloaded an app to learn Italian phrases, practicing ciao, Bella, every morning with a wink that made me giggle like we were still in our 20s. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I thought our biggest worries were William's creaky knees from years of climbing ladders and whether we'd repaint the living room sage green or soft blue. I believed we had decades left, more Sunday suppers, more evenings on the swing, more mornings with his kisses, waking me up. I thought I knew William Carter, the man I'd loved for 40 years. I thought I understood what kind of husband I'd married. But 3 months before he died, a crack appeared in our perfect world. It was subtle at first, like a hairline fracture in one of William's carefully crafted tables. I didn't notice it right away, but looking back, it was the beginning of everything falling apart. While I was living in our cozy bubble, planning meals and dreaming of Italy, William was hiding something that would explain every cold word, every late night, every moment he pulled away from me. I was so wrong about what was coming, and that envelope in my hands was about to shatter everything I thought I knew about our love. That crack in our world started on a quiet Wednesday evening in April, 4 months before William's heart attack. Wednesdays were our errand nights, a little ritual we'd kept for years. We'd drive to the market on Oak Street, William pushing the cart while I checked items off my list, him sneaking a pint of Rocky Road ice cream into the basket when he thought I wasn't looking. But that night, he called from the workshop, his voice clipped. Got a big order to finish, Sue, rain check on the market. It wasn't unheard of. William's carpentry business had its busy seasons, but it felt off, like a note played, slightly out of tune. I went alone, the cart feeling heavier without his chatter to lighten the load. When I got home around 7:30, arms full of grocery bags, William was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, his phone in his hands. The moment I walked in, he flipped it face down, a quick, almost guilty motion, and jumped up to help with the bags. "How's your day, honey?" I asked, trying to keep things normal as I unpacked the groceries. "Fine," he said, his eyes darting back to the phone. "Just a long one," but he kept glancing at it, like he was expecting a call any second. I brushed it off, told myself it was just work stress. William had always been a worrier when it came to his clients' orders. Custom cabinets, dining tables, bookshelves, that had to be perfect. Over the next few weeks, though, I couldn't ignore the changes. William, who used to leave his phone charging in the kitchen overnight, now kept it on his nightstand, even in his pocket when he showered. The man who'd laugh and hand me his phone to read his texts while he drove now guarded it like it held the secrets of the universe. One evening in early May, I brought him his coffee while he worked at his desk in the living room, a habit I'd kept since our early days. Black, 1 sugar, served in the blue ceramic mug he loved because it kept the coffee hot. As I set it down, I caught a glimpse of his laptop screen, a messaging app I didn't recognize, words flashing before he slammed the laptop shut. "Your coffee, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Thanks," he muttered, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on the closed laptop. I couldn't help myself. "Working late again?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Looked like you were chatting with someone." His response was sharp, like a knife. "Just work, Susan. You don't need to hover over me every second." The words hit me like a slap. William had never spoken to me like that, not in 40 years. The man who called my coffee his daily dose of love was gone, replaced by someone who flinched at my presence. I stepped back, the mug still warm in my hands. "I'm sorry," I stammered, feeling foolish. "I didn't mean to bother you." His face softened for a split second, a flicker of something like regret, but then he turned back to his laptop. "It's fine. Just a lot going on at the shop. He didn't look at me. I retreated to the kitchen, my hand shaking as I loaded the dishwasher. A big order, I told myself. He's just stressed. But deep down, a small voice whispered that this wasn't about work. The William the First knew would have apologized, pulled me into his arms, told me what was wrong. This William was hiding something, and it was tearing me apart. The distance grew with every passing week. William started staying late at the workshop, more often, missing dinners. I'd spent hours preparing his favorite pork chops with apple glaze, or salmon with lemon and dill because he'd mentioned craving it. I'd set the table with the white plates we got for our 20th anniversary, light a candle, and wait. By 8 p.m., I'd eat alone, staring at his empty chair, the food growing cold. I'd call his workshop, and his assistant, Mark, would sound confused. "Oh, Suzanne, William left around 5 today. Thought he was heading home." 5. Where was he for those extra hours? When he finally walked through the door at 9 or 10, he'd mumble, "Stopped for a beer with the guys. Needed to unwind." But William had never been one for bars. His idea of unwinding was sitting on our porch swing with me, telling me about his day while I rubbed his shoulders. The worst part wasn't the missed dinners or the vague excuses. It was watching the man I loved become someone I didn't know, even when he was right beside me. Our conversations, once the heartbeat of our evenings, shriveled into clipped exchanges. "Did you call about the gutters?" he'd ask, scrolling through his phone. "Yes, they're coming Friday," I'd reply, desperate to keep him talking. "How was your day? You seemed tense this morning." "Fine," he'd say, eyes glued to his screen. "Emily called. She might visit next month." Home, he'd mutter, not looking up. "Work email." "What about Emily?" I'd repeat myself, but the spark was gone, my words falling into a void. I started feeling invisible. I'd walk into the living room where William sat, and he wouldn't glance up. I'd talk about my volunteer work at the church, the kids' reading program I'd started, or something funny our neighbor, Mrs. Larson, said in the garden, and he'd nod without hearing me. The man who used to notice my new earrings or tease me about my terrible singing now seemed oblivious to my existence unless I was doing something practical, like handing him a plate or paying a bill. The annual Carter Carpentry picnic was always my favorite day of the year. For 25 years, I'd looked forward to that first Saturday in June, at Lithia Park, where Williams' employees and their families gathered for burgers, games, and laughter. I knew everyone's names, their kids' birthdays, their stories. I loved being the carpenter's wife, the one who made everyone feel welcome. But this year, from the moment we arrived, something was wrong. William was tense, checking his phone constantly, scanning the crowd like he was avoiding someone or waiting for them. When I suggested our usual spot by the creek, he shook his head. "Let's try somewhere else this time," he said, steering me to a table at the edge of the park, far from the usual buzz. I tried to ignore the unease. "Whatever you want, honey," I said, squeezing his arm. For the first hour, things felt almost normal. I chatted with new employees, asked about their families, played my role as the warm, supportive wife, but William kept disappearing to grab drinks, check the grill, take quick calls. During one of his absences, I spotted his longtime crew, Mark, Lisa from the office, and Tom, the shop's foreman, laughing by the creek. These were people I'd known forever, shared countless potlucks and holiday parties with. I walked over, eager for a real conversation. Susan, Lisa, stood to hug me. "We were just talking about that oak table order." "What a headache," I smiled, settling into a chair. "William mentioned that one. Tough client, huh?" Tom took a sip of his soda and said casually, "Yeah, but it's nice William's got that storage unit in Portland for overflow supplies. Must help with those late nights." The words landed like a punch. Storage unit. In Portland. I felt my smile freeze. The table went silent, the kind of silence that screamed someone's made a mistake. "Storage unit," I said, my voice sounding strange, like it belonged to someone else. "What storage unit?" Tom's face paled. He glanced at Lisa, who looked away. "Oh, I mean, you know, the place William got for extra materials," he stammered. "I thought," his voice trailed off. "We don't have a storage unit," I said, but the words felt shaky, uncertain. "We've always kept everything at the workshop." The silence stretched, suffocating. Lisa stared at her plate. Mark suddenly found his burger fascinating. Susan, William's voice cut through the tension, sharp and panicked. I turned to see him striding toward us, his face flushed. "There you are. I was looking for you." I stood, my heart pounding. Tom was just telling me about your storage unit in Portland, I said slowly, watching his reaction. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Tom with a look that could have stopped a train. Tom's mixed up, he said quickly. He's thinking of someone else. You know how these guys get their stories wrong. But I saw the glances exchanged around the table, Lisa's pity, Tom's discomfort, Mark's silence. Right. Tom mumbled, clearly uneasy. My mistake. The humiliation burned through me. Not just because of this mysterious storage unit, but because these people, our friends, knew something about my husband's life that I didn't. I'd been playing the devoted wife while they watched, knowing he was hiding something. I need some air, I said, my voice barely steady as I stood, my chair scraping the grass. William called after me, but I kept walking, my legs trembling, until I reached the park's restroom. Inside, I locked myself in a stall and cried, my tears mixing with the mascara running down my cheeks. When I finally came out, William was pacing outside, his face a mix of frustration and something I couldn't read. But instead of explaining, he lashed out, "You embarrassed me out there, Susan," making a scene over Tom's stupid mix-up. His words felt like a betrayal. The William I'd married would have followed me, held me, explained. This William cared more about how he looked than the fact that I was falling apart. In that moment, I knew something fundamental had broken between us, and I wasn't sure if we could ever fix it. The drive home from the Carter Carpentry picnic was 20 minutes of suffocating silence. William gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his jaw set like he was bracing for a fight. I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar streets of Ashland blur past, each one a reminder of the life we'd built together. Our house on Pine Street, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage where I was playing a role I no longer understood. I waited for William to say something, anything, to explain the storage unit Tom had mentioned or the anger in his voice when I'd asked about it, but he just parked the truck, got out, and walked inside without a word, leaving me sitting there, my heart pounding. I followed him into the house, my hands trembling. 40 years of marriage had taught me to read William's moods like a book, and every line of his body screamed defensiveness, not remorse. I had to try, though. I had to give him a chance to make this right. "William," I said softly, as he headed toward his workshop in the garage, "can we talk about what happened back there? Please." He stopped in the doorway, his back to me. "What's there to talk about, Susan?" Tom got his wires crossed. "You didn't need to make a scene." His voice was sharp, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "William, look at me," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "If something's going on, if you're unhappy, we can figure it out. We always have." He turned then, and the look on his face wasn't the man I'd married. It was cold, almost calculated, like he'd rehearsed this moment. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he snapped. "I can't even talk to my crew without you turning it into some big drama. Do you ever think maybe you're the problem, Susan? Maybe I just need a little space?" His words cut deeper than any argument we'd ever had. I felt my breath catch, my legs unsteady. "I'm not trying to cause drama," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "I just want to understand why you're shutting me out." He didn't answer. He just shook his head, like I was a child who couldn't grasp something simple, and walked into the garage, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood there in the hallway, alone, feeling like I'd been dismissed from my own life. That night, I lay in bed next to William, but it might as well have been an ocean between us. His steady breathing felt like a mockery of the closeness we'd lost. I kept replaying his words, "Maybe you're the problem," and wondered when I'd stopped being his partner and started being his burden. The weeks that followed were a slow unraveling. I stopped asking about his day, stopped trying to spark conversations that only ended in silence or sharp words. I stopped waiting up for him when he came home late, his clothes smelling faintly of sawdust and something else I couldn't place. I poured my energy into other things, organizing book drives at the church, spending hours weeding the garden, visiting Mrs. Larson next door, to talk about anything but my crumbling marriage. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the emptiness followed me. I was invisible in my own home, a ghost haunting the life I used to love. One gray Saturday afternoon, in July, 3 months before William's heart attack, I hit rock bottom. He'd left that morning for what he called a client emergency, even though it was the weekend and his workshop was closed. I didn't question him anymore. Every question led to accusations, arguments that left me feeling smaller than before. Alone in our house, the silence felt heavier than ever, like the walls were holding their breath. I wandered through rooms we'd decorated together, touching the cedar bookshelves William had built, the quilt we'd picked out for our 30th anniversary. They felt like relics from someone else's life. I stopped in our bedroom, my eyes landing on our wedding photo on the dresser. There we were, 22 and 24, laughing as William carried me over the threshold of our first apartment. I picked up the frame, tracing his smile, trying to remember what it felt like to be so sure of his love, so certain of my place in his world. When had I become this woman, tiptoeing through her own house, afraid to speak, afraid to need? When had I started apologizing for existing? I sat on the edge of our bed, the photos still in my hands, and tried to recall the last time William had touched me with intention, a hug, a hand on my shoulder, anything that said, "I see you." I couldn't. His kisses had become perfunctory pecks, his "I love yous" as automatic as locking the door. The grief hit me like a wave, not just for what we were losing, but for what I'd already lost without noticing. I was mourning my husband while he was still alive, still sleeping beside me, still carrying my last name. That evening, unable to bear the silence, I called my best friend, Patricia. The moment I heard her voice, I broke down. "I think my marriage is over," I sobbed. 40 years, and I don't know who I am without him. I don't know how to keep going, pretending everything's fine when he's already gone. Patricia didn't try to fix it. She just listened as I poured out months of pent-up pain, admitting what I'd been too proud, misshapen to say out loud. I was disappearing, and I didn't know how to stop it. 2 weeks after William's funeral, I finally found the strength to start sorting through his things. Emily and Thomas offered to help, but I needed to do this alone, to touch the pieces of our life together one last time. Even if that life had become a puzzle I couldn't solve. I started in his workshop, the garage where he'd spent countless hours shaping wood into tables, chairs, and the swing that still hung on our porch. The air smelled of sawdust and varnish, a scent that used to feel like home but now just made my chest ache. His tools were neatly arranged, his workbench covered with sketches of unfinished projects. It was so William, orderly, precise, always planning 3 steps ahead. In the corner, tucked inside a wooden toolbox he'd made for our 10th anniversary, I found something that didn't belong, a second envelope, different from the one Father Michael had given me. This one was worn, the edges slightly yellowed, as if it had been handled often. My name, Susan, was written across it in William's careful handwriting. But there was something else, a note in smaller script. "Susan, if I'm gone, read this before the letter I gave Father Michael. I love you more than you'll ever know, William." My hands shook as I held it, my mind racing. 2 letters. How long had William been planning for his death? What secrets had he been carrying that needed 2 explanations? I sank onto the workbench stool, the envelope heavy in my hands. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. Inside were 3 handwritten pages, along with a few folded documents I didn't recognize. I unfolded the first page and started to read. "My dearest Susan," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you found this in my toolbox, where I hoped you'd look. I need to tell you the truth, even though I know it'll hurt you. Everything I've done these past months was because I love you too much to let you suffer for me." My breath caught, tears blurring the words. I had to stop, steady myself, before I could keep going. 4 months ago, Dr. Ellis told me I have a serious heart condition, severe aortic stenosis. He said a heart attack could happen anytime, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a year. There's surgery, but it's risky, and even with it, my time might be short. I watched my dad go through heart surgery. Susan, how it broke him and Mom, how she spent years nursing him, losing herself in his pain. I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't let you watch me fade or spend your days waiting for the phone to ring with bad news. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling a sob. A heart condition. William had been sick, and he'd never told me. The pages shook as I read on. "The storage unit Tom mentioned at the picnic, it's real, but it's not what you thought. It's a small apartment in Portland I rented, a place to go if I got too sick to stay at home, so you wouldn't have to care for me when I couldn't care for myself. I was trying to plan a way to leave without dragging you into my pain." My sobs came harder now, loud and raw, echoing in the empty workshop. Every late night, every cold word, every time he'd pushed me away, wasn't because he'd stopped loving me. It was because he loved me too much, or so he thought. "I know I've been cruel these past months," he wrote. "Every time I snapped at you, Every time I stayed late or hid behind my phone, I was trying to make you love me less. I thought if I could make you pull away, it would hurt less when I was gone. I thought I was protecting you. But every time I saw the pain in your eyes, I hated myself a little more. I set the letter down, my vision swimming. The documents included a lease for the Portland apartment, dated 4 months ago, and a brochure for a cardiac care facility in Salem. There was even a draft of a letter to Emily and Thomas, explaining why he might have to go away for a while. William had been orchestrating his own disappearance, believing it was the ultimate act of love. For 3 days, I stayed in that workshop, reading and rereading his words until they were carved into my heart. I didn't eat, barely slept, ignored calls from Emily, Thomas, and Patricia. I needed to let this truth settle, to understand how completely I'd misread those final months. The anger came first, a white-hot fury that made me want to scream. How dare he decide what I could handle? How dare he assume I'd rather lose his love than face his illness? I threw a hammer across the workshop, the clatter echoing my rage. "You idiot," I whispered to his toolbox, to the air. "You robbed us of our last months together." But the anger gave way to a deeper, more tangled grief. William had been carrying this alone, lying awake while I slept beside him, planning his exit to spare me pain. Every cold shoulder had been a lie, every harsh word a shield for his fear. On the 4th day, I called Dr. Ellis, William's cardiologist. I needed to hear it from someone who'd seen his fear firsthand. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice gentle over the phone, "I'm so sorry for your loss. William loved you fiercely." "He had aortic stenosis," I said, cutting to the chase. "Why didn't he tell me?" There was a pause, heavy with regret. "William insisted on keeping it private. He was terrified of what it meant for you. Every visit, he'd ask about worst-case scenarios, how long he had, what surgery would do, whether he'd end up bedridden. He kept saying, 'I can't let Susan spend her life waiting for me to die.' Did you tell him to include me?" I asked, my voice tight. "Every time," Dr. Ellis said firmly. "I told him families do better when they face these things together, that you could have had years with treatment medication, maybe surgery. His condition wasn't a death sentence, not yet. But he was fixated on his father's decline, on not putting you through that." I closed my eyes, picturing William in that sterile office, hearing his diagnosis and already building walls between us. "So he chose to break my heart instead," I said quietly. "Yes," Dr. Ellis replied. "He thought he was choosing the lesser pain. He was wrong." I hung up and walked to our backyard, where William's rose garden sat, the blooms he'd tended now wilting in the late summer heat. He'd always been a planner, staking each plant with care, pruning them to perfection. He'd approached his illness the same way, thinking he could control the outcome, protect me through sheer will. But his plan had backfired. Instead of shielding me, he'd left me questioning my worth, believing I'd failed as a wife. Instead of preparing me for life without him, he'd made me feel abandoned while he was still here. The letter Father Michael gave me at the funeral was shorter, written in a different tone, more urgent. "Susan, if you've read the letter in my toolbox, you know the truth. I thought pushing you away would make losing me easier, but I see now I was wrong. I hurt you to save you, and I'll carry that guilt forever. I love you, always." Reading it, I felt a shift. William hadn't just been hiding his illness, he'd been tormenting himself, watching me hurt and believing it was for my own good. His love hadn't faded. It had been twisted by fear. I started piecing together those final months through his eyes. When he snapped at me over coffee, he wasn't rejecting my care, he was panicking about becoming dependent. When he stayed late, he wasn't with another woman, he was in that Portland apartment, probably staring at walls, planning how to vanish without breaking me. The irony was devastating. His attempt to protect me had caused the very pain he'd wanted to spare me. I wasn't grieving a disease we could have faced together. I was grieving a love I thought I'd lost. A husband who'd chosen to disappear emotionally while still standing in front of me. After finding William's letters and understanding the truth about his heart condition, I knew I couldn't stay stuck in the anger and grief that had consumed me. I needed to find a way to live with what he'd done, to make sense of a love that had hurt so deeply because it was trying to protect me. I started small, signing up for grief counseling with Dr. Laura Hayes, a therapist who specialized in complicated loss. In our first session, she looked at me with steady eyes and said, "Susan, what William did was rooted in love, but it caused you real pain. You're allowed to feel both gratitude for his intentions and anger for how he went about it. Her words gave me permission to hold those truths together, to stop trying to choose between loving him and resenting him. I began researching heart disease, reading about aortic stenosis in the quiet of my home office. The medical journals described symptoms I now recognized in hindsight: William's occasional shortness of breath, the way he'd pause on stairs, blaming his creaky knees. I'd dismissed those moments, chalked them up to age or overwork at the shop, but they were signs of a battle he was fighting alone. I joined an online support group for families affected by heart disease, not ready to share my story but desperate to hear from others. One night, a woman named Ellen described her husband's diagnosis. He started pulling away, she said, her voice trembling through my laptop speakers. He'd get angry, push me out, like he was trying to spare me. It wasn't until he collapsed that I found out he'd known about his heart for months. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, realizing William wasn't alone in his misguided sacrifice. I opened up to Emily and Thomas, inviting them over for dinner, not to sort through their father's things, but to talk about what I'd missed. Over my chicken pot pie, the one Evelyn taught me to make, I showed them the letters. Dad called me last spring, Thomas said, his voice soft. He asked if I'd look after you if something happened to him. I thought he was just getting sentimental. Emily nodded, her fork still in her hand. He kept asking me if you had enough friends, if you'd be okay on your own. It was intense, like he was planning something. Hearing their stories, I saw how William had been quietly building a safety net for me. Even as he pushed me away, his love was in every question, every plan, even if he'd gone about it all wrong. The hardest conversation was with Evelyn, William's mother. We'd kept a polite distance since the funeral, her grief making her sharp, mine making me raw. One afternoon, she showed up with a dish of her famous peach cobbler, her hands nervous as she set it on my kitchen table. "Susan, I need to say something," she began, her voice unsteady. "I saw how distant you and William were those last months. I thought you'd given up on him, that you weren't there when he needed you. I was wrong to judge you." I took her hand, the letters and William's toolbox between us. "Evelyn, he was sick. He had a heart condition, and didn't tell anyone. He thought pushing us away would make it easier when he was gone." Her eyes widened, tears spilling over. "Like his father," she whispered. "William watched his dad's heart problems tear us apart. He always said he'd rather die than put you through that." I read her parts of his letters, the ones where he wrote about sparing me the pain of caregiving. "He thought he was saving me," I said, "but he broke my heart instead." Evelyn's shoulders shook as she cried. "I'm so sorry, Susan. I thought you'd drifted apart. I didn't know he was carrying this alone." We sat there, two women grieving the same man, finding a new understanding in our shared loss. By the time she left, we'd started rebuilding something, maybe not the closeness we'd had, but a bond forged in truth. A year after William's death, I stood on our porch, looking at the swing he'd built. The roses in his garden were blooming again, their petals bright against the October sky. I'd moved his wedding photo to the mantel, a small shift that felt like a step toward living with his memory instead of being haunted by it. I still talk to him sometimes, my words a mix of love and frustration. "You broke my heart twice, William," I'd say to his picture, "once when you pulled away, and once when I learned why. But I get it now, even if you got it so wrong." I joined a heart health advocacy group, something I never imagined doing. Twice a month, I sit with families facing diagnoses like William's, sharing our story as a warning and a hope. I tell them about the months we lost to his secrecy, how his fear of burdening me stole our last moments together. Just last week, a man named David, diagnosed at 60, broke down as I read from William's letter. "That's what I've been doing," he said, his voice cracking, "pushing my wife away so she won't have to watch me die." His wife, Linda, grabbed his hand and said, "I'm right here, David. Don't you dare decide for me." Watching them, I felt a pang for what William and I could have had, but also gratitude for helping others avoid our mistakes. William's fear became my purpose. His letters taught me that love isn't about shielding someone from penance, about trusting them to share it. He thought protecting me meant carrying his burden alone, but real love would have meant letting me stand beside him, facing the unknown together. I miss him every day, not just the man I lost to a heart attack, but the one I lost months before, when fear turned him into a stranger. But I'm not angry anymore. I understand now that William was trapped by his love as much as I was hurt by it. He was a good man who made a terrible choice, believing it was the only way to save me. As I sit on our swing, feeling the familiar creak under my weight, I think of a couple I met last week, both in their 60s, facing his heart diagnosis. Together, they asked questions, held hands, planned with hope and honesty. That's what William and I should. His gift to me now is the chance to help others write a different ending. One where love means facing the hard things side by side, not hiding them to spare someone's heart.